What I find interesting is why did the early church decide to do a council?
Was there ever females in these roles, or was it purely males?
When they've all finished, James stands up. I thought James died.
What's the significance of David's fallen tent?
Sharp disagreement is what the NIV says.
That seems to kind of go against what they've just said.
Yeah.
Isn't this burdening them? Paul, what are you doing? No.
Either means Paul was not paying attention to the previous chapter or something different is going on here.
You're listening to the Expert, PK and Newbie podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Expert, PK and Newbie podcast, the podcast where each week we take a passage of the Bible, we read it together and we get the three different perspectives off of three different people. As always, I have with me Lachlan Miller, our expert.
Hello.
Morgan Carter, our newbie.
Hi.
And I'm Joshua Lee, the PK pastor's kid. How are you all doing?
I'm well. I was talking to you before we started recording, Josh, and just talking about how busy work life is and personal life is with lots and lots and lots going on. So if you're a Nawi Baptist Church listener to this podcast, I'll date this episode by saying we are beginning setup for our annual holiday club. And so that is where it's a beautiful moment where literally the entire church comes together and plays a role somewhere in organising this children's holiday program. And it's really great to see, but it is a very busy season at church.
And I feel like that's a insider knowledge, if you know, you know, sort of
exactly,
thing.
Yeah, just dropping things for the church listeners who follow along for me. Morgan, how are you?
I'm good. I'm cold in Melbourne. Went back to church yesterday after a long break, which was nice. But yeah, not much is happening on my end. How about you, Josh?
Good. I'm back from a work trip that's taken me to the Nullarbor. Down in South Australia and Western Australia. We had to travel through South Australia to Western Australia to get to where we were filming. And we were filming a documentary on cave diving.
Oh,
Fun.
Underwater caves, yeah. So it was about just over a week of having to camp out there and film with the caves as well as the cave divers. So it's nice to be back home and I can actually have a proper shower and sleep in my own bed. But
did you get in the caves?
Yes.
And film underwater?
I didn't know, but the divers did. Yes.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah, went to two caves, and boy, it was exhausting to go through to get all the equipment that we had and everything through that cave. So, it was good, but glad it's over. Kind of, I don't think I'll be doing a caves film anytime soon.
Makes me think of when I was a kid and watching Bear Grylls, and while you respected what he was doing, you're always like, but the cameraman's doing all of this, but carrying a camera.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. Plus carrying a 20-kilo camera. So before we jump into the passage today, don't forget to check out our social medias and stay up to date with all those, but also check out our Patreon. That's a place where you get to financially support us, but also get a bit of extra content there. So check out our link tree for all those links. Lockie, what passages are we doing today?
We are just doing Acts chapter 15.
Today's passage comes from the book of Acts chapter 15. Paul and Barnabas return home, rejoicing about God's work among the Gentiles. But the sheer number of new Gentile converts raises the issue of what Gentile membership of the church should look like, leading to the first church council in Jerusalem to settle the matter.
So when reading 15, my first thought is we see circumcision again, and it's something we see a few times. Why is that?
I think that's the question of the entire passage. Is kind of this thought surrounding circumcision and God's law found in the book of Moses. Sorry, in the book of Moses.
Come on, Josh, you're at Bible college now.
I know. I think in the book of Moses, in the first 5 books. No, not in the book of Moses, but in the law that Moses brings.
But circumcision's introduced even before the law of Moses, which feels relevant to bring up. This was, if we remember back to when we looked at Genesis 17, the covenant of circumcision is given to Abraham and all of his descendants as a physical sign of the covenant God had made to Abraham. But I also think here in this passage, while the word circumcision just keeps coming up a lot, I do think it's short form for obeying all of the Mosaic law.
Mm-hmm.
I think verse 5 is the most obvious example of that, because in verse 5, these Christians say, the Gentiles must be circumcised and required to keep the law of Moses. So I think circumcision is like the flashpoint of this debate of should these new Gentile believers be circumcised, but the real debate is really and keep every single law of Moses recorded in the Torah.
I mean, it's kind of this would only apply for the males, but it's kind of for a Jewish person's the beginning of their life. This act happens, so it's the kind of their start of them upholding the law, if that makes sense. Kind of their starting point. So you can, from that perspective, you can kind of see why there is a focus on that. But I would say you're quite right with the, following the law of Moses. I mean, especially because that line comes from Pharisees who are now Christians, and they would definitely know the law back to front, inside and out, and all the little bits and pieces they've made up so that they could uphold it.
Yeah, and I don't think it's surprising that there are a bunch of Pharisees in this new Christian community. Like Paul was a Pharisee, and then he became a Christian. And so I assume that many other Pharisees converted to Christianity, but then also brought in the elements that really made the Pharisees a good thing in Judaism, which is that commitment to the law, that commitment to God. But they are struggling with these new Gentile converts who are not behaving in that exact same way.
No. And I think this question sometimes plagues my mind, and sometimes I go through sort of this wrestle of like, especially when you look at the Old Testament, you start reading the Old Testament and especially if you read Leviticus or, any parts of, where sort of the law of Moses' law comes up, or any part of the Old Testament, you start to sort of grapple with, do I need to follow these things? It's part of my Bible, right? Should I be upholding these laws, these rules, these customs? 9 times out of 10, we don't necessarily think about doing all that, or we don't hold any Jewish festivals or anything like that. But, coming to this question is like, well, does that apply to us? Should we be doing all this?
And by the end of this chapter, I think we'll have a very definite answer for you, Josh.
I think so. But it's great that we're talking about it, because oftentimes I do struggle with this idea of like, well, we've got quote unquote Jewish heritage by faith, not necessarily heritage by blood. But it's, and I think for I don't know if you've ever thought about this, Morgan. Maybe for new Christians, like maybe this is something too that's like, oh, I've got to follow all these rules and all that.
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned it when we've been through it before in Genesis. Working in a pediatric hospital, we used to have a clinic once a week that was for circumcisions, and there was waiting lists. Like, it's still quite big, and that was a big shock to me. Like, I didn't realize it was still a thing.
But as you just pointed out, Josh, it's step one to being a Jew. Like, you can't obey all the laws of Moses until you do step one, which is enter into the Jewish community via circumcision.
Yeah.
So here we have Paul and Barnabas wrestling with these questions.
Yes, so it's probably helpful to remember where we were last week.
Yes.
Which is that Paul and Barnabas have just finished their first missionary journey. They have evangelized the cities of kind of southern Turkey, and they've seen massive Gentile conversion. Like, the Jews primarily rejected their message was the theme of last week's episode, and the Gentiles really accepted the message. Also, probably in this exact same time period as they returned to Antioch, Paul probably wrote the letter to the Galatians, which is a letter slightly further along in our Bibles. So if you see the book of Galatians, Paul probably wrote it around here, because Galatia refers to southern Turkey. And so he wrote it back to those churches he's just been to. And while they're here in Antioch, like celebrating the fact they've just had a really successful missionary journey, a bunch of Christians from Jerusalem, so like from the home church, from the most prestigious church at the moment, come and start teaching something that Paul and Barnabas do not like. Like it says they get into a dispute and debate with them.
And the way they go about, sort of, there's this debate happening, but the way they go about trying to decide what to do is Barnabas and Paul get sent to Jerusalem, accompanied by other local believers, and they talk to the apostles and the elders about this question. So it doesn't become, well, Paul and Barnabas are trying to sort of work this out. This now becomes a group sort of effort, and is what sort of we call the council at Jerusalem. Here we first see what, and correct me if I'm wrong, the very first time we see a Christian church council.
Yes, effectively.
Effectively, yeah. We sort of mark this as in history as the first Christian council that ever sort of occurs.
This could be a dumb question, but we're going with it. Could you tell me or remind me exactly what the law of Moses is?
Yeah, definitely. So the law of Moses is all of the commandments given by God that we read about in the first 5 books of the Bible. So the Jewish Torah, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Now, if you're into maths and counting, you will see that there is 613 of these laws that is given. And so while, again, circumcision is the specific one brought up, I think the real discussion is, should the Gentiles be obeying all 613 different laws originally given by God through Moses?
I just want to say I feel like you knew I was going to ask that by having the exact number ready.
See, I knew it was a large number, but I couldn't
I just love
remember
how you
how
whip
many.
it out.
Nah, it's one of those numbers that I've never verified, but I've read many, many times. I think many people who write books about theology love to show how smart they are by being like, the 613 laws of the Mosaic Covenant, but I've never personally double-checked or fact-checked that number.
No, I just feel like you're always prepared. Like you just pull it out every time.
Anyway, we get to Jerusalem, right? This is home territory. This is where the church started. This is where some of the biggest names of Christianity still reside. And this party of the Pharisees, they get up, they make their case. Luke has decided not really to include their case. Like, it makes it clear that there was a lot of discussion, but then he jumps straight to Peter.
Peter begins by saying that he's been preaching to the Gentiles. And he's sort of, well, he actually hasn't, like, he's been able to get a response from God sort of with this. As if we remember Peter's dream.
Yeah.
Was it a dream? Yeah. Where we had the food laws, if I'm remembering it correctly. The food laws get sort of, for lack of a better way of describing it, waived from, being able to having to follow it, all those sort of kosher laws as we discussed it. Again, this is sort of like bringing the gospel not just for the select few, but for everybody. And he sort of gets up and recounts his sort of his experiences, his being able to go to the Gentiles and preach to the Gentiles here.
Yeah, so that's the story of when Cornelius was converted, Cornelius the Roman centurion, which, to put it into perspective, probably happened 10 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Now, for us, I think it was 2 episodes ago.
Yes.
But in the story of Acts, the date of this council is generally taken to be AD 49. And so the conversion of Cornelius happened much, much earlier, like the very beginnings of the church. And what I love about what Peter has to say here at this council is that he makes it super clear that God has already spoken on this topic. And the way God has spoken in this topic is, Peter says, God made a choice, giving the Holy Spirit to the Gentiles. And so Peter is like, who are we to even say anything or do anything or make any decision? God has demonstrated that he has accepted Gentiles before they've been circumcised, before they've obeyed any laws of Moses, before they've offered any sacrifices at the temple. God has accepted them into be equal brothers with us by the giving of his Holy Spirit. And so if God is going to give them his Holy Spirit, this debate is sort of already settled, to be honest, because God has made it clear his opinion on the topic.
You sort of, to further not prove his point, but further emphasize his point, he's saying, well, why, if God's made his decision, why are we then burdening them even further? Like, why are we putting this yoke, as he puts it, like, why are we restricting them with these when it's not required?
Which leads to the conclusion of they are saved through the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. Like, that is how salvation is achieved, is through grace.
Mm-hmm.
My section is for verse 6 is titled the Jerusalem Council. Back then, is a council like what we look at a council now, like areas, or?
How do you mean by now?
So, like, say my area is like 5 suburbs is one council. So it's like
one
an
local
area-based kind of suburb.
Is that just an Australian thing? Like, would listeners from other countries be like, what the heck are they talking about?
Well, in the UK, it's not a thing at all.
Oh, I actually would have thought
they have like it's like a county.
Yeah. So
similar.
Australians just use the word councils for what the UK says for counties. Maybe Americans are like area or something like
areas. I mean, so I've done a little bit of research into councils. And to answer your question, Morgan, if we look at defining councils,
oh no.
Now I'm not just going to recount. That is the iPad. I've slowly just revealed the iPad.
He's pulled his notes out from first year church history.
Two can play at this game, Lockie. Hang on, let me just put this in front of me.
Josh is going to start quoting all these Bible verses off the top of his head.
Two can play this game, Lockie. That's so funny.
So I'm not just going to just regurgitate. The Merriam-Webster defines council as no. I've written my own definition for it. So a council is a group of people specifically designated or selected to consult, deliberate, or make decisions. These councils usually represent a large body of people, e.g. an organisation, and can act in an advisory, administrative, or legislative capacity. So purely based on definition, yes, they would be the same as back then. What they were setting out to do is the same as how a council would function here. How the structure, the people involved, the topics, their sort of outcomes, what they were doing. Well, that's all going to differ depending on the group that's come together. But really, just in layman's terms, it's a group that's been given the authority to make a decision on behalf of a larger group.
So when we say like the apostles and the elders, like the elders would be the ones that kind of have the final say in the council.
I think we'll get to that because I think one man stands up at the end of the council and it really is him who just sort of makes the final call. And I think rightly given his position. But the apostles and the elders are the ones discussing it. And I think as a church governance system, the apostles and the elders are the ones who make this call, even though James later on really becomes the mouthpiece of that decision.
I was really shocked recently. Our church is moving location. They're talking about the structure of the church, and I couldn't believe that they were still referred to as an elders group. And it just it seemed really old school, but they actually refer to them as elders, and it's a really young Pentecostal church. Just surprised me.
Well, I assume they're just trying to capture the biblical language, which is, I think, a really excellent thing to do because the job description of elder is well articulated in multiple parts of the New Testament. So you know exactly what is expected of that type of leader.
I think just as a newbie, I was like, that seemed really old school to me.
Yes, especially if you're part of a church that might call their church council a board, or
that's becoming more popular.
Yes, that's becoming which is interesting because I had a conversation with someone saying when I was on the sort of we kind of got to we got to update the church and make it so sort of old. They pointed out, and I was like, get rid let's get rid of the term council and we'll use something like board or something. They pointed out, I was like, well, board sounds very clinical and business-like, which is not, we're getting into the realm where we don't necessarily want the church to be like that. And that actually put it into perspective, actually, no. At the end of the day, these are just arbitrary names for sort of these, for these groups. However, in saying that, if we're using things like elders or deacons that are actually biblically defined, then I think that's slightly different.
As long as we're using them in the way that they're biblically defined.
Yes.
Because I think in most churches, your senior pastor or your pastoral staff function as the elders of your church. And while we give them a different name, the role that they do is what a biblical elder does.
Yeah.
So I think the real danger comes in using biblical terms, but then not actually having that exactly like the biblical office. Whereas I think it's okay to slightly change up your titles as long as it's a helpful system and structure.
Yes. And see, at the end of the day, their function still remains their function, whatever you call it.
Yeah. What I find interesting is, why did the early church decide to do a council of all the options available to us? So in Acts chapter 1, they make a decision by casting lots. So why didn't they just throw some dice onto the ground and be like, God, should we circumcise the Gentiles? Cast some lots. Or in verse 22 and verse 32 of this very chapter, we know that there are prophets present at this meeting. Like, here are people that are the mouthpiece of God, like giving direct revelation as part of their spiritual gifting, and yet they're not consulted either. Instead, they decide to get everyone together and have a reasoned and thoughtful argument on the topic.
That's a good question. I've never thought of that.
I just kind of think, like, who decided who was the leaders and going to make decisions right at the start?
Well, I assume that the apostles were the original leaders of the church because Jesus appointed them, and then they appointed leaders and elders in other places and over other churches, and just kind of went from there.
Was there ever females in these roles, or was it purely males?
In a biblical context or in a church context? So in like church history to come,
Biblical.
because in church history to come, there's going to be lots of men and women in a variety of different roles. In the New Testament, we never have a female elder clearly articulated. There is one female apostle who is very, very briefly mentioned at the end of the book of Romans.
But, like, women weren't able to make the big decisions.
It does seem from a general reading of the New Testament that the role of elder was reserved for men. And as we see here, it seems to be the elders and the apostles getting together to make these decisions. Now, this is a much bigger topic than a side tangential conversation from Acts 15. But that would be my brief starting on the topic.
Because there are many throughout church history that there are many women that play very significant roles within church history.
Absolutely.
And that provide a lot to sort of the church in its various different forms throughout history.
So again, I don't know if this is necessarily a topic we want to spend all the time on now, but I actually did an assignment on this topic for my time in Bible college, and I've just pulled it up because that's the advantage of technology in the modern era. And I'd love to read just half a paragraph of what I wrote, and this is what I have to say. A brief survey reveals that the New Testament both encourages and demonstrates women caring for the poor, hosting the church in their homes, correcting and training unequipped leaders, praying and prophesying in church, serving as deacons, serving as apostles, and laboring for the gospel as co-workers of Paul. This list shows that women were heavily and significantly involved in Christian ministry in the New Testament. And for every one of those things that I listed there, I then had brackets that had multiple Bible references to prove the point. So while in this exact scenario in Acts 15, we do not see any women involved in this church council making quite a big and large and important decision, that's not to downplay the significant role and impact women were making for the gospel, just even within the New Testament. So to bring us back, Peter finishes speaking and the whole assembly became silent. And so I think Peter's done quite a convincing job, which then allows Paul and Barnabas to get up and share their experience. So if Peter's experience confirms that God is giving his opinion on the topic by giving the Holy Spirit to Gentiles, Paul and Barnabas get up and reveal that that is now happening on a mass scale. It didn't just happen for Peter, it's happening all over the world, basically, because Paul and Barnabas have preached the gospel widely.
And that's our last episode. That's chapter 13 to 14. That's the episodes that we get of that happening. So even for us as readers, we know it's happening. So we get to verse 13 here, and when they've all finished, James stands up. Now, I thought James died.
James, the brother of John, son of Zebedee, died. This is James, son of Mary and Joseph.
Oh.
That Mary and Joseph.
That Mary and Joseph.
Brother of Jesus.
Oh.
And so we know that during the gospel story that Jesus' brothers or his siblings, because he has sisters as well, didn't believe what he was saying. But clearly post his resurrection, they came to believe. In fact, in 1 Corinthians, Paul will say specifically that Jesus appeared to James. So by name, Jesus appeared to his brother James and convinced him of his claims. And then James became the leader of the Jerusalem church. And we know that from outside of the Bible. So for instance, in Josephus, he dedicates a section to talking about James, the leader of the Jerusalem church, and how he was particularly well regarded for how well he kept the Jewish law. So as James stands up, the Pharisees in the crowd probably are looking at who they think should be their greatest ally. Like this is a man whose authority is at the highest possible point because he's literally the brother of Jesus, and he's well known for how well he keeps the law. Any other questions about James, or have I answered everything about James?
No. I mean, for the record, I actually did know all of that.
Good question, though. This is also the same James who wrote the book of James in our Bibles.
There you go.
When and if we ever reach that on this podcast.
In verse 16, what's the significance of David's fallen tent?
That's a great question.
Yes.
David was promised a kingdom that would never end, in the sense that one of his descendants would always sit on the throne. And then it all went wrong and his descendants were no longer on the throne. And so the Jews said that like the legacy of David had failed, his tent had fallen over. Like there was no more Davidic rulers ruling over Israel. And so what James is doing here is saying, well, the Lord has promised that even though David's household is in ruins, he will restore it. And he's restoring it through Jesus. He will create a new tabernacle. The debate I've read surrounding this particular quote is less about Septuagint versus Masoretic and more about what is this new rebuilt tabernacle. And most people seem to agree that the new tent of David that has been built basically over the remains of the old one is the church, is what most scholars seem to land on. Now, it's not universal consensus, but it's like Israel with David as its ruler has sort of passed away, and now the church with Jesus as its ruler is the rebuilt tent.
So the tent is a metaphor.
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, should I have led with that?
The tent is a metaphor.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. For his dynasty, his kingdom, his house.
Yeah.
Thank you for that answer.
We got there eventually.
We got there in the end.
I wonder what the timestamp will be on the difference between when she asked and when we answered it.
I just lost it, completely lost it in my head.
That's okay.
But I think that gets us really caught up in the beginning of verse 16, because while James does quote this whole section, I do think the reason he's quoting it is for what we then read in verse 17, which is that even all the Gentiles who bear my name, says the Lord, who does these things from known from long ago. So James is, I think, quoting the Old Testament to be like, look, it was always promised that the Gentiles would be included. And so God promised long ago the Gentiles be included, and now we see them being included, and God has confirmed that by giving his Holy Spirit to Gentiles, and we've seen through Peter and Paul and Barnabas that is happening. So therefore, it is James's judgment that they should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. And that's the reason he uses that quote. So no matter what else we have to say about that quote, probably more so from its original context than from how James is using it.
Yes.
James is definitely using it to be like the Gentiles are promised to be included eventually, and now they are.
Yes, which is sort of the whole point of this chapter anyway. We're getting off topic if we're not thinking about, well, what about the Gentiles?
Yes, which is the whole debate.
Yes.
James has seemingly just said, I agree with Peter, Paul, and Barnabas. Let's say the Gentiles don't have to follow any of the laws of Moses and they don't need to be circumcised. That seems to be what James has just declared in front of the entire assembly as the leader of the Jerusalem church. But then he lists 4 what seem to be laws of Moses that the Gentiles still have to obey.
But why, Lockie?
That seems to kind of go against what they've just said.
Yeah.
Isn't this burdening them?
Yeah. Here are 4 burdens after James has said, let's not make them do anything.
Yeah.
Let's not make them do the laws of Moses because that's a burden that they shouldn't have to bear. But do these 4 things. And for reference points, they should not eat food polluted by idols. They should not be sexually immoral. They should not eat meat of strangled animals, and they should not eat blood.
So mine says abstain from things polluted by idols. What does that mean?
It is by food sacrificed to idols. So like your pagan temple to Zeus, you'd go sacrifice a pig to Zeus, and then you'd go serve the pig for dinner.
Right, okay.
So any animal sacrificed to a god in a pagan ritual, don't eat. Any ideas why suddenly these 4 laws specifically are like, hey, you don't have to follow all the laws of Moses as Christians, as Gentile Christians, but you must follow these 4? Because when I first read it, it really stands out like a sore thumb.
Yes. You sort of get this sort of momentum that's happening where it's like, oh, okay, none of the laws apply to us. Excellent. But then, we get sort of hit with this and you're like, but what? Like it's I don't know, it's almost like this backtracking that's happening. And I don't even know if verse 21 is giving us. I'm trying to look at verse 21 of like saying, where it says, for these laws of Moses have been preached in the Jewish synagogues in every city on every Sabbath for many generations. I'm reading that as that's a justification.
Yep. Verse 21 starts with the word for, which would make you think, oh, this explains the reason why he said it. And it's more confusing than the previous verse.
Okay. So just because they were preaching it, so what the Gentiles might have heard about it, that's the whole reason that they are including these? I'm more confused than I have answers.
I think verse 21 I can explain easily, and then we might return to so what's going on with these laws then. So I think what verse 21 is saying is that these stipulations or these 4 commands should not be surprising to any of our Gentiles because they hear them regularly in the synagogue. They hear them regularly preached every Sabbath. So these 4 things we've just said they must still obey shouldn't surprise them, for they're always being taught and preached. So I think that explains verse 21.
But yes, we're still
stuck on verse 20.
Yes. To have a stab at why we have these 4 very almost specific. Like out of all of the, how many did you say?
613.
13, we have 4. So there sort of seems to be a reason why we might have 4. I feel like it's not just like, we'll pick out these random 4 and I'm like, that'll be fine. They'll have to just follow that.
They're just James's favorite.
Yeah, it's like, no, we'll include
His
those.
4 commandments.
It's James's 4 commandments, the commandments of James. I would say the first one, because it's speaking about false idols, it's more akin to holding, or not turning to false idols, is more just turning straight to God. Would be my leap, if you will.
Yep. So idolatry is what's being condemned there.
Yeah. Sexual immorality. We hear that sort of preached, so talked about a lot, and staying faithful to if you have a spouse or a partner would be part of that. So that talks about your heart and sort of lust and want and sort of remaining true. Eating meat from strangled animals. I'm taking pot shots at this. I'm not. I don't know.
I think where you're going with this is you're trying to find a logical reason why each one of these 4 would be chosen out of all else.
Yes, I'm trying to sort of go, well,
there must be a reason. Is effectively what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm trying to go, there must be a reason. Did Jesus say anything about that? Like, because Jesus came and sort of unpacked the law for us and sort of didn't change it, but fulfilled it and brought greater understanding of what it's more to do about the heart issues and the reason why you do these things rather than just being straight legalism.
Then why not stuff like murder and hate and some of the most famous teachings of Jesus that directly relate to Old Testament laws?
Why not just quote above all else, love God and love your neighbor? Like, why not just say that? If I'm if we're going down this rabbit hole of like, well, it must come from somewhere.
Why is there 3 based on food and 1 not on food?
Again, a great question, because there's a link between them. Maybe that will help us.
Is it bestiality?
None of these relate to bestiality. I guess sexual immorality.
Only
That
way
is
I could
technically.
That's the only way. Oh, no.
Can you give us a hint without telling us?
I'm not going to give you a hint because I'm not convinced I 100% have the correct answer. So I'm not trying to like slowly lead you towards the one ultimately correct answer. I do have 3 options, and I do think one of the options is the strongest, but I don't want to present it as the only answer, if that makes sense. So how about I tell you some of the options and you can either like dismiss it totally or jump 100% on board. The first option is that some people argue that these are just a collection of laws that are most offensive to Jewish sensibilities. And so one of the biggest things that was going to separate the church at this point is Jews couldn't share a meal with Gentiles unless they kept certain practices. And that was going to split the church right down the middle. And so James is effectively saying, hey, you don't have to keep the law as a Gentile Christian, but so that you can still have table fellowship with Jewish Christians, how about you don't do these 4 things that are sort of the most offensive to Jewish sensibilities when it comes to gathering together?
That makes sense.
So that's a pretty decent option.
Yeah.
The weakness of that is in the letter that they write to the Gentile churches in the next few sentences. They don't present these 4 things as hey, this would be really helpful for harmonious relationships with the Jews. Instead, they present it as requirements and as decrees, which I think makes it stronger than this viewpoint initially allows, if that makes sense.
It does.
Do you want to go on to some of the other views, or do you have comments on this one?
The Jew one makes sense, but I'm keen to hear the other ones before I come to my conclusion.
Fair. So there's a theologian called Jervel, and he argues that if you were to turn back in your Bibles to Leviticus 17 and 18, you will read laws given by God via Moses specifically for the strangers in Israel. Now, the strangers in Israel are Gentiles or non-Jewish people who have come to live in the land of Israel, and they are not, even according to the Mosaic law, expected to uphold every single law of the Jews. Instead, they're given, a selection is the wrong word, but they are given like specific laws of, if you're going to live in Israel, you have to follow these ones. While the Jews are told, if you're going to live in Israel and be a Jew, you have to follow all of them. And so Leviticus 17 and 18 have a whole bunch of requirements just for the strangers living in Israel.
Okay.
And Jervel argues that these 4 appear in Leviticus 17 and 18. And so it's an allusion to everything in the Mosaic covenant that is expected of everyone universally, you are still to keep and obey. But those things that were just for Jewish people living in Israel, you're free from.
So the Gentiles would be classed as these strangers to the Jewish law, so they have to uphold these ones as it's stated in Leviticus.
Now, the weakness in that one is that there are many other laws found in Leviticus 17 and 18 relating to the stranger, not just these 4.
Yep.
So the argument has to go that James has just included sort of these 4 so that people would be pointed in the right direction while not listing all of them. Because otherwise, you're missing a whole bunch of extra ones that are still in that chapter and seem really, really important in the context of Leviticus 17 and 18. And so that Morgan can make a fully informed decision. The third viewpoint that I think is the most persuasive, a theologian called Witherington argues for this, which is that the combination of references to idolatry, blood, strangled animals, and sexual immorality would be instantly recognized as activity associated with pagan temples. Thus, the Gentile Christians do not need to keep the Jewish Mosaic law, but neither can they remain in pagan idolatry.
Yeah.
And this is where I think you were starting to go, Josh.
Yes.
You went, idolatry appears. You can't go to a temple and eat meat sacrificed. And you can't do sexual immorality, which was associated heavily with pagan temples. Like they would have cult prostitutes who you would go and sleep with for the benefit of your gods. And the way that they would kill animals and consume animals was by strangling them and drinking the blood. Like all of these things are alarm bells for exactly what happens in a pagan temple. Now, that one's not perfect either. Because again, you have to make a step there.
Yes.
But I think it's the strongest option, personally. But happy to hear opinions from the table.
It would make sense. Like, yes, you have to make a step, but it does make sense why, like, well, if it was referring to sort of the stranger laws in Leviticus, why not just include all of them here, especially because you're quoting Amos anyway, so why not just go a step further and just include all those? And what was the first one, sorry?
Like the things most offensive to Jews if you're trying to share a meal with them.
Sort of makes sense, but yeah, again, why not say, well, with your fellow brothers and sisters, why not? You know, like, why not include the language that includes everybody in community, if that makes sense, rather than just outright being like, we can't do this. If that was, it seems, so for the first one, it seems very sort of almost Pharisee-like thinking to go, well, in order for everyone to be in community, we're making these set rules so that everyone will be, rather than saying, well, rather than explaining, well, they hold this custom, you have this, so that you can still be together, just, you know, be respectful and all that jazz. So yeah, and then making that step for the third one. Yeah, it definitely, and again, I think like what you just said, I think that's where I was trying to go to without knowing I was going there.
Morgan?
I think if I had to choose from face value, not knowing as much as you both, I would go the first one because it just makes sense logically to me.
Yeah, fair enough.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're things that I would know about Jewish people. I don't know. I just feel like the blood and that just all makes sense to me. So I'd go the first one. Yeah.
And like you wouldn't be alone in terms of academic theologians agreeing with you. I've been very one-sided in my presentation. We're like, I think this one's the best, but like you're by no means choosing a bad choice.
No.
Because it is confusing. It is like, hey, James has just said, Gentile Christians, you do not have to get circumcised and you do not have to obey all the laws of Moses except for these 4. And I do think there has to be a way to figure out why these 4 are chosen.
Yes. So I guess then a question that stems from this is, well, does this apply to us as Gentiles? Like, is this something that we have to follow if this is what the decision is?
That's a great question. Paul, the apostle, a man beloved by us. I feel like I'm just killing time as I flick to the right page of my Bible.
That sounds like you're stalling.
I don't know what you're talking about. In 1 Corinthians chapter 8, and chapter 7, actually, Paul makes it clear that eating meat sacrificed to idols is fine as long as it doesn't cause one of your Christian brothers to stumble, which means that these commands by James can't be universal, always applicable to Gentile Christians. They must also in some way be time-bound so that whatever they are signifying, that must be the universal thing, but the exact application of that must be time-bound. And so if we take that first view that Morgan likes, it would be that in 1 Corinthians 7 and 8, Paul is saying, if it makes your brother or sister stumble, do not eat food sacrificed to idols, but otherwise it's fine, you're not sinning by doing so. And so the first viewpoint would say, well, if you are ever meeting with a Jewish Christian, if you have Jews as part of your church, you wouldn't ever eat meat sacrificed to idols because that would cause them to stumble. But if you're in purely Gentile church, if you're in 21st century Australian church where there's probably no one of Jewish ancestry, you could eat meat sacrificed to idols. Not that that's really much of a problem for us anymore. If you took the third view, for instance, which is that these 4 things are being listed because they're effectively trying to convince the Gentiles to not be involved in pagan activities at all, or specifically pagan idolatry in a temple situation. Paul is saying, hey, you're no longer involved in that idolatry in temples, so if you happen to go to the markets and it's cheaper to buy meat sacrificed to idols, go ahead and buy that meat. Like, why would you spend double down the street to the meat not sacrificed to idols? And so I think it works in both of those. I think the second viewpoint actually has struggles because the second viewpoint of these stranger commands in Leviticus 7 and 18 always apply, they then hit this wall of, but then Paul says maybe 10 years later in 1 Corinthians 7 and 8 that this one of the 4 is sort of fine to do. Now, the other 3 are never revoked, and I will argue that sexual immorality will definitely never be revoked. The other 2, I think, are up for debate if the first or third view is what is on offer here.
I just guess, why did he do that? Like, why did he say that in the first place?
James or Paul or God? Yeah, sorry, who are you referring to there?
Whoever's making this statement from 20 or from 19.
Yeah. So James.
So why? Like overall, why did he do that?
He clearly had a purpose. If his purpose was that first viewpoint, his purpose was, I do not want to see our church, our community of Christians split along Jewish and Gentile lines because they can't have table fellowship together. So his intention was, while you don't have to keep the Jewish law, Gentiles, please keep enough of it so that you can have fellowship with Jews. So his intention is church unity. And so all of these laws would be pointing at maintain church unity, even though you are free from the laws, do everything it takes to maintain unity.
And was he successful?
Yeah. Like in terms of the New Testament church, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we're looking at the current church, which is split into a billion different fragments. So who knows if he was ultimately successful in church unity. But if it was that third viewpoint, the entire reason he gives these lists of instructions is saying, you're no longer like Gentiles, you do not have to keep the Jewish laws. You are freed from that, but you cannot remain in your pagan idolatry. So while you don't have to become a Jew, you cannot remain a pagan idolater. And I would say he was very successful in that in terms of the Christian community turning away from those things.
Oh, yes. I mean, yeah. They, so much so that the authorities sort of scratched their head going, why aren't you participating in just like what they would deem just normal everyday life? Because they didn't want to be a part of anything that wasn't, of God.
But I think we can summarize this Jerusalem Council now, which is that the Jerusalem Council has clarified that Gentiles do not need to become Jews to be saved, because salvation is grace alone through faith in the Lord Jesus.
Yep.
And it's also clarified that while you don't have to become a Jew, Gentiles, you still can't be a pagan anymore. Like you're a new thing, you're a Christian.
And this, this is like, this is them deciding what to do with the Gentiles, and but like really, this is how you become a believer. This is like speaking beyond that to everyone throughout history and us of going, well, this is how you become a believer. It's through grace alone. It's through faith in Jesus. It's not through these steps or the laws that you have to uphold, singularly just through Jesus.
Which has always been the foundational message of Jesus.
Yep, 100%.
And so then they write a letter to be sent to all of the churches that were concerned about this topic. And Morgan, what did you originally have to say about this next section?
So what I said at the beginning is it felt like it just repeated itself again.
And we've encountered that writing style in the Bible several times.
Yes, we have.
Where to show emphasis on a topic, the story seems to be repeated almost verbatim immediately. And so in the next few verses, we have them writing a letter which explains the decision they've just reached at the council and how they came to that decision. And it's like, yes, we know, we read it. We were there.
Yes, Luke.
Yeah. But I think what's important about this letter is they lay the decision of the council at the feet of the Holy Spirit. If you look at how the letter ends, it's very much like it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us. They've really put the entire burden onto God is the one who directed this whole council. God is the one who directed the outcome of this council. This decision is from the Holy Spirit.
Yes. Which we hope that all our meetings are.
Yeah, we'd hope so, yeah.
Holy Spirit led.
We also see Luke do something that he's done a few other times, which is introduce a major character with a really low-key introduction. And so Silas here in this bit is introduced as one of the people who will carry the letter to the churches. And Silas will become a very important figure in the rest of the book of Acts. But he's just introduced really low-key here. He's a prophet. He's probably a Gentile Christian, given that he has a Latin name here. But otherwise, we don't really know anything about him.
And Morgan, we have a bit of drama with Paul and Barnabas here.
She loves the drama.
Which was alluded to.
Yeah, I talked about it last episode.
Yeah. Paul and Barnabas seem to having a bit of a spat.
A sharp disagreement is what the NIV says.
Sharp disagreement. What does mine say? The disagreement was so sharp, they separated.
So yours just says sharp as well.
Yeah, it just says sharp.
That was a long wait for, it says the same thing.
It's just the same thing. Well, you never know with the NLT.
Yeah.
Full of surprises.
We should probably articulate for any listeners who didn't read the passage why they are having a sharp disagreement. Morgan, do you want to summarize why they're fighting?
Is it because Paul insisted that they shouldn't take along a man that Barnabas wanted to take? John Mark?
Yeah.
I said that in a really confusing way. Barnabas wanted to take along John Mark, but Paul didn't want him to.
Yeah. And that's because Mark, back a few chapters ago, left them halfway through the missionary journey. And Paul has not forgiven him. Well, I don't know if that's a fair reading. He doesn't think it's a good decision to bring along someone who has, in the past, deserted. Whereas Barnabas, well, Mark is his cousin, so
yeah, kind of family ties.
I think he may want to forgive
if someone
him.
left me on a holiday, I probably wouldn't go on the next holiday with them. So I get that.
True, if you put it that way.
And as I pointed out last episode, in Paul's letters, we see him speak very fondly of both Barnabas and Mark. So the disagreement here that happens, well, it's probably really significant at the time because they literally broke up. Like, as a missionary couple, for lack of a better word, Paul and Barnabas went their separate ways, but later on there was clearly reconciliation.
I know, a dynamic duo.
Yeah, fallen apart. But I think it actually ends up a really positive thing because instead of Paul and Barnabas going to one location, we have Barnabas and Mark going to one location and Paul and Silas going to another. And so we effectively have two different missionary journeys that then come about because of this.
As we've seen, whenever people get dispersed, the work is still there.
Yeah.
It's never like, from a surface level, it could be a negative, but it's actually spreading the gospel further.
Yeah. I think it's one of those classic examples of the Lord working even amongst human sin and disagreement and conflict. God is working. Because while Paul and Barnabas were absolutely the dream team, by them deciding to not go together because of this disagreement, more people are reached with the gospel because they go to different places now. And in case just everyone somehow missed it, there's Silas, the one I said would be important later on. There he is, he's back, and he will now be the new traveling companion for Paul.
Paul chooses Silas.
And just before we end, I thought it would be helpful to also do verses 1 to 5 of chapter 16, because I think it's a really natural continuation of both the theme of Acts 15, but also we have Paul and Silas then joined by a third member of their team. Timothy joins the team, and these three men will then be the ones who go out on the next missionary journey that we'll read about in next episode. But I think verses 1 to 5 really fit on the discussion we've already been having from Acts 15.
And we see a woman.
Yeah, Timothy's is a grandmother there?
Son of a believing Jewish woman.
Yes. We find out in a later letter from Paul that Timothy's grandmother was also a Christian. But the reason I think this section works is we have just read Acts 15, where Paul has vigorously defended that Gentile Christians do not need to be circumcised. And then we have Paul meet Timothy and circumcise him, which either means Paul was not paying attention to the previous chapter or something different is going on here. That's why I think we need to discuss it now and not next week when we forget.
No, we have two instances where they've said one thing and then all of a sudden,
like instantly
give us the other.
Is he doing that out of spite to just prove a point?
I don't think so.
Prove a point to who? Because it's pretty brutal on Timothy.
No, it just seems like spite because, I don't know, that's the vibe I'm getting.
What's interesting is we get given that Timothy's mother was Jewish, but his father was Greek.
Yes.
And so here we have a clash of we could argue this is a clash of a Jew and a Gentile here together.
In the one person, yeah.
In the one person. So what do you do about that? Why he's decided to then do this seems very bizarre. Or it might be because of those Jewish heritage that's within him. That you have a Jewish mother, Jewish lineage, so to still uphold the laws given to your heritage, he must be circumcised.
It's probably really important to point out here at this point that even today in modern Judaism, Jewishness is passed through the mother's line, not the father's line. So if you had a father who was Jew and a mother who was a non-Jew, the Jewish community would not see you as a Jew.
Interesting.
That is wild.
But if you have a mother who's a Jew and a father who is not a Jew, you are still considered a Jew.
Because it's interesting, because when I first read this, I read that the father was Greek, so I immediately pinned him as Gentile.
Yep.
But now with that information, that very interestingly breaks so much like historical social norms about where your like lineage and heritage comes from.
Yeah. So Jewishness is passed down via the mother's line, which means Timothy was a Jew in the eyes of the Jewish community.
Yes.
But he was an uncircumcised Jew, which means he was an apostate, which is worse than being a Gentile.
This just keeps getting deeper and deeper. Okay.
Because an apostate Jew is worse than just being someone who's unrelated to it.
Well, why didn't? Unless they were why? Well, why not? Because if the custom, like if that is the Jewish customs, well, you would like.
Doesn't mean his mother stuck to it.
No, that's
it
true.
doesn't mean his father, who was a non-Jew, wanted that ceremony performed.
No, well, that's what I'm thinking of. Well, okay, somewhere down the line, they've strayed off that path there, and yeah, with the Greek father, maybe there was influence there of not wanting to do that.
But regardless, he wasn't circumcised. We know that for a fact.
We do. It's written.
It's written right there on the page.
Yep.
So why, therefore, right after the Council of Jerusalem, is Timothy circumcised?
I am not sure.
That's fair. Thank you for being honest.
Actually, maybe, is it because they're traveling through new towns and they want more people to do it? So it's like a role model vibe?
More people to be circumcised?
Yeah.
Ooh.
So he's like, I'll do it if you do it.
I feel like you were on the right path for the answer and then you jumped into a ditch.
Okay, so they were going through new towns. That part's right. And they were trying to lead by example. No, I just worded that different.
They're going to new towns and to be accepted within the Jewish communities.
So Acts 15 was about how you do not need to be circumcised to be saved. What it doesn't say is therefore never get circumcised. That, like just so we're very clear about the explicit teaching of Acts 15, salvation is not achieved by circumcision, but it's not therefore never do it. And what Paul does is he sees this young man, Timothy, he hears good things about him, he wants him to join his missionary team, but the Jews in that area won't even give Timothy a second look because they know he's an apostate Jew. They know he has a Greek father, they know he's not circumcised, and they will not listen to him when he goes to share about the gospel because they would refuse to listen to someone like Timothy. So for the sake of the gospel being spread, they decide to circumcise Timothy. Again, not for salvation, but so the gospel could be spread to people who otherwise would not listen to Timothy. There's a somewhat parallel situation that is explained in Galatians chapter 2. In Galatians chapter 2, Paul refuses to let Titus be circumcised. He refuses to let him get circumcised because the church is saying he must be for salvation. So in the situation where the argument is you must do it for salvation, Paul is very clear. Whereas here, where it's not for salvation, but it's so that they can be listened to by the Jewish community, it is allowed. Not allowed, just it's done. Like Paul does it.
Yes, because here, nowhere is it saying about salvation here. And if we look at the actual words that's used, it's in deference to the Jews of the area. And I've just looked up the word deference, which means politely submit and respect. So even within the text here, and I don't know if a different word is used within your guys' Bible, in verse 3.
Just says because of the Jews.
Yeah, mine says that too.
Mine's given sort of a little bit more to try and understand what Paul's intentions here. But even just like, regardless, just looking at this, the text here should have, given us hints at the
It gave you everything you needed.
It did. We were so, and I think we were just so like caught up on the, Paul, what are you doing? No. But yes, I think that is an excellent thing to remember of like, medically speaking, regardless of where you stand on it from a medical point of view, still can do it. But from a salvation point of view, it's not your ticket.
It's not required in any way. And then the section ends with one of these statements we see many times in Acts, which sort of divides the stories up into nice little chunks, which is that they grew daily in numbers. So the church was strengthened in the faith and they grew daily in numbers. And so the church continues to grow after this great big church council happens. And that's great. What a win.
Make sure to follow us on our socials like Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube to keep up with what's happening with the podcast. If you would like to financially support us, sign up to our Patreon. Our patrons will get content access earlier, longer episodes, and more. If you like the podcast, subscribe to us on YouTube or any audio podcast platform of your choice. Give us a like, and if you have the time, leave us a review.
My final thought would be learning about, in the section in Acts about the Council of Jerusalem, just questioning what a council is and, learning about how the decisions were made and how it works with the apostles and the leaders and things. I found that really interesting.
Yes, my final thoughts are that sort of what Peter was talking about, how he was saying that God is already going to the Gentiles here. And it's them as a church trying to decide sort of how to process this information and sort of tackle these issues. But I think the heart of it is that God's already working and we're just sort of trying to catch up with him. God's on the move and we're just sort of slowly, getting there, trying to pick up those pieces, the pieces that God's been dropping there. And it's not as a result of this council that, okay, well, now Jesus is going to go to the Gentiles. Like, no, Jesus has been working with the Gentiles already, and the plan was already for the Gentiles to be included in all this. And so I guess that's really sort of affirming for us that are, sitting here that don't have a Jewish heritage or aren't brought up Jewish first, that us as Gentiles, that we've always been included first.
I've always loved Acts chapter 15 for its theological richness. Like, you have this pivotal moment in church history of how we're going to deal with the fact that this gospel is not just for Jews, but is for everyone. How are we going to deal with that fact? I love that then springboarded into how the church would deal with issues for the next several hundred years in really important church councils. Also love that how in the book of Acts, it's like theologically, but also structurally in the very middle. Like, it's what the book of Acts is almost built around, is this moment. And we're now into the second half of this season. And I'm excited to now do the second half of the book of Acts with the church having clarified well and truly that the gospel is for everyone. For us, that's not a big revelation. For them, it is huge. And they don't need to go back to this topic again now. In fact, now they charge forward with the gospel truly heading towards the ends of the earth.
Well, as we just get to the end, let me just close out in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I again thank you that we can gather here today, that we can gather in fellowship, and that all those that are listening are also able to both read and hear your word. And we again thank you for your servants that have been able to grapple with these questions, and that again thank you that the Gentiles here have always been part of your plan, that the gospel has not only just been for the Jewish community, but is also just for everybody, Lord. And again, we continue to thank you for that your Son, your salvation, all the acts that Jesus has done is for everybody here, and we can just continue to thank you for that. I pray for Lockie and Morgan as they go out in their weeks, that you be with them, and I pray for all our listeners that you be with them, and that your kingdom may be done on this earth as it is in heaven, Lord. In Jesus' mighty name I pray, amen. Lockie and Morgan, thank you, and for everybody watching and listening at home, we'll see you next week. Bye.
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 A Mustard Seed Creative Production.